Hi, and welcome to CleetCast. My name is Alex Price, and I'm with Cleet Public Affairs. I'm alongside
Ariana Smith. I'm also with Cleet Public Affairs.
Today we have Charlie Wilkeson, Cleet Executive Director, and we're going to discuss the committee hearing last week on criminal justice. Charlie, do you want to go ahead and dive in and tell us what the hearing was actually about?
Thanks, guys. It's one thing I really like about this is I like your hat, and that feather over there it has to be from two different fowls. I don't know where that came from. Is that an Austin hat, or is that from home in Corpus Christi?
This is turning into an ad for the Guren Brothers hat shop on South Congress.
Is that where you got it?
Yeah.
It's a cool hat.
Yeah, my fedora. I'm wearing a fedora today because I'm going on vacation later this week, and so to set this week off.
Okay, well, duly noted. The Senate Committee on Criminal Justice had an interim hearing. Those interim charges are handed down by the Lieutenant Governor in collaboration, of course, with the chair and members of the committee. Senator Whitmire was the longest-serving member of the Texas legislature. His long-time relationship with law enforcement all over the state, and last year received an award from Cleet, and it's been awarded, friend relationship awards for many things, accomplishments that he's had over the years. So we were happy to be a part of that and have invited testimony. Our belief was, of course, that we were going to come in and talk about officer safety, deaths of officers, community policing, etc. And he's going to separate out several different hearings, he said. And in that setting, of course, we had, I believe, we had the president of the Houston area NAACP, a bishop from one of the large African American congregations in Houston, and Chief Art Acevedo of the Austin Police Department, and McGraw, the executive director of the Department of Public Safety. So it was a varied deal. The senator was clear that he wanted kind of a open communication, that there wouldn't be a home team, that we would be keep it open and respectful. I know from our side we did that. We came out of that setting allowing people that may not be back in the Capitol every day, that they may not have a political role every single day of session. They got to have their moment and say what they thought. When it was important, I felt we made our point, but not to the point of being disrespectful or adding to kind of a shrill anti voice there. And I felt basically good about the hearing as far as our participation as part of the other witnesses. We didn't talk about the things that we had originally been told that perhaps would be on that list, and we talked about officer training. We talked about the feeling of almost a permanent rift in America, Texas, between communities of minority communities and the police community, and all those things need to be said. Those comments need to be made, and law enforcement needs to hear from people who have not necessarily had a positive experience. However, I think we missed a real opportunity, and I brought it up and pretty quickly saw that there was lack of interest from the committee. But I brought up the long, hard-won path toward professional standards in Texas. This was a predominantly white male profession, and there was a big push over time to bring professional standards so that you're not just a police officer because you're naturally born one, that because your father was a law enforcement officer, your grandfather was a law enforcement officer, that instead that we push towards the state civil service, which came to Texas and took years to implement and push through. I was really proud of the fact that we've begun to reflect in the police force the face of Texas, and that because of civil service, and even cities and counties that don't have civil service has begun to mimic the professional standards and the rights inside of civil service. And that's something that Texans should be proud of. When our law enforcement officers in Texas are trained the most in the country, we have given them discretion under the law. They're compelled when they're brought in, an officer has a complaint against them. They're covered under 212 of the Criminal Code, and officers are not like regular citizens. There is no Fifth Amendment. They are not only compelled to speak to their employer, they're compelled to tell the truth, and can lose their license or be terminated from employment because they were even untruthful. There's no profession that's more regulated. Lawyers can do all kinds of things and keep their license. Doctors can lose life and keep their license, so they can operate on someone and be intoxicated and still somehow maintain, you'll be remorseful and come back. So to ignore that path, where to professional standards in Texas, where if an officer is coming from a different state, they have to have remedial training because we train higher. To ignore that wasn't just disrespectful necessarily, because it's their committee hearing, but to ignore that and to jump right in and just begin as though we're back in 1950. We're back in a time when law enforcement officers have no empathy for the community, or they have no training, or there's something inherently wrong with policing in itself. I felt that was wrong and unfair and historically incorrect, and I would like to have seen it done differently. And so perhaps we'll be able to make those points at a different hearing. If we don't, then I intend to make those points every step I take in the Capitol to those elected officials, so that they don't forget. And for the new people coming in, we're going to have a large freshman class. And for those folks coming in, and for the sophomores that perhaps have already forgotten over the interim, they need to be reminded that the police force is highly trained and highly educated, and that part of our issues in Texas are not related to any kind of malfeasance, incompetence, or lack of training for law enforcement. It's the lack of following a lawful order, and not one word, not one mention of that.
Definitely. And I know that, I guess one of the recommendations that they did jump into was talking about adding a checkbox or essentially a comment box at the end of a ticket. And earlier that week, TMPA spoke with the Texas Tribune, and I quote Kevin Lawrence from TMPA, "Every time we have a contact, we should hand that individual a form that says, 'Hey, by the way, if you're unhappy about anything that I've done today, here's the process by which you go about filing a complaint against me. And if you're happy about it, here's a process by which you can go online and give us some feedback.'" What were your feelings about those recommendations and that comment from, another organization in Texas?
Well, it plays right into the hands of the politicians. We're sitting there with Chief Acevedo, who in that same moment had clearly wanted to upend state civil service law and stop the 180-day window that's allowed under the law to gather a case against an officer. If you've done something wrong, think about the stretch of 180 days. That's a long time for internal affairs and for the chief's office, who have nothing better to do. They have plenty of money and resources to go out and investigate you. So the law says you got 180 days. You don't have forever to come back from last year and say, "Oh, by the way, you did this wrong. You're terminated. You're disciplined. You're going to be demoted," and some other punitive thing. And so the law is clear, 180 days. And so in that setting, attempting to pander toward politicians, professional politicians who are hell-bent on changing policing in the state and defaming the whole process. It's ill-advised, and putting a checkbox on a citation is a mistake. We'll be opposed to that, and if people want to complain against an officer, gosh, let's don't add a box in the heat of the moment where you've just been given a citation that's going to take away part of your grocery money. There's no way you're going to be in a good mood toward that officer, even if you did the wrong thing. It's human nature. So almost soliciting a complaint against a police officer is going to be the wrong thing. So that idea is pandering to the politicians that want to change policing, and it's unfortunate that it was ever said. It was a mistake. I think in the climate of that hearing, let's go back to that. In the climate of the hearing, where you had State Representative Boris Miles, who's not a member of the committee, come in and lecture me and say, Mr. Wilkerson, while you're talking about officer deaths, I believe is the way he said it, or summarized that, the police in Texas have killed more people than any other state other than the state of California. And to equate the honorable, sacrificial death of a law enforcement officer with a criminal with a gun that has to be taken out because they won't drop it, or they won't comply with the lawful order, or they're a threat to other human life, or the threat to the community and to the peace, to somehow muddy the water, to make the claim somehow that there's something wrong with Texas as the population's exploded. You have rank and file officers in every large municipal and county organization are stretched thin. We've lost the most in the line of duty of any state in America. So to equate their death with the death of armed criminals who are ill-intended and intend to kill someone, including that officer, that's highly disrespectful. And that proves that you say something like that, you're not intending to ever make friends with the law enforcement community. I was also disappointed, frankly, with Senator Chuy Hinojosa's comments that actually, I believe the way he said it was that or we've actually lost the number of officers in Texas to car wrecks or car accidents, and not to gun violence. Not only is that a false narrative, anti-police story that's pushed out there, false, let's cover that first. That's an example right there of the fact that, look at the facts. There have been 170 car accident deaths in Texas. Those people were no less in the line of duty. They were pursuing a criminal, going to a call, trying to save someone's life, trying to save someone's property, trying to protect someone's family, and they were killed in a car accident. That's not any less than being killed with a gun. It's just a lie. There are fewer. There are almost 1,100 officers in the history of Texas that have been killed due to gun violence. 170 have been killed in car accidents. When we separate out vehicular homicide, where people intentionally ran down the officer with a vehicle. So not only was it disrespectful, it was intentional. And that's the kind of climate we're going to have in the next legislative session. So if they want to somehow denigrate or lessen the sacrifice of an officer killed in the line of duty, it's that false narrative that somehow the officer is complicit in his own death. And that's just absolutely wrong. Senator Hinojosa has been in the House, he's been in the Senate for years, and he knows better, and it was intentional. And that sort of thing that we'll be looking out for, because if we're going to trust that person with your pension, with your retirement rights, or we're going to trust that person to stand strong for you to be able to have the tools you need to enforce the law and do your job. And so that's the kind of narrative that's in there in that building. And both parties are complicit in this, and both parties are showing signs of being opposed to the police. And so it'll be a battle royal beginning January of 2017.
Thanks, Charlie. And our own Ariana Smith was with you at the hearing, so she got an inside view and has her own insight on what happened that day. So I'm going to hand it over to her.
Hey, Charlie. How's it going?
Morning.
So, as Alex stated, I was at the hearing. It was mentioned by Senator Whitmire that law enforcement doesn't seem to understand the reality of minority communities. How do you feel about that perspective? And is there anything CLEAT can do to change that perspective?
Well, I feel like that we've worked toward that. And when Senator Whitmire says something, I certainly listen. And I want to hear voices that are different from ours. And I don't want to be always defensive. And I don't think it serves us well to do that. Although when it comes time to stand up and defend, when it comes time to know the difference between putting a complaint form on the bottom of a ticket and caving in to these voices out there that are anti-police and claiming, oh well, that's the way the private sector does it. Well, let me just tell you, there's a difference, a huge difference between a sworn peace officer and law enforcement officer risking their life and someone who's working on the factory floor, someone's working in a corporation in one of the fine service industries in Austin, Texas, and you know thousands of folks that are doing good jobs, raising their families. They're being protected by the police. There's a huge difference in that, and just with a blanket statement say that we don't understand. But then when I brought up the idea that we're moving in the right directions, and Senator West actually pointed out where we'd actually assisted him on a bill with body cameras, and I reminded him that CLEAT, of course, had taken a strong stand that racial profiling, for example, shouldn't be legal. That you shouldn't be looking for people of certain race. Criminal profiling should be the officer should be on super heightened scrutiny for that. If you're looking for a mule car coming out of Mexico that fits some kind of profile, that's your job to stop that car. Also, I think some of the other officer organization in the room, President Ray Hunt from Houston, pointed out clearly, and I thought it was a great point, that majority officers don't know the race of a person when they actually pull people over in Texas with tinted windows and et cetera, with try to protect folks from the rays. And so I think to say that they don't understand when we're saying, well, we're civil service and training in Texas and professional standards have created the same test for minorities and women, have created the same kind of opportunities for officers of all different races and gender come to be a police officer and be promoted and serve with distinction inside the police department. Then the answer back to that my recollection is, well, I hear that some of those people are just as abusive as others. So it's a condemnation, really, of law enforcement, and it's not just in Texas; it's a national trend. So I think more training is always good. I think I think it'd be fine for us to tell high school freshmen how to behave at a police stop. I think it'd be good to remind folks to keep your hands visible, and I think putting that in the driver's test, putting it in the driver's handbook, putting it in defensive driving to remember, to remind folks that they've had some kind of infraction, so you're taking defensive driving to refresh yourself of what it is to drive. I know in a defensive driving course, class years ago, I was suddenly remembered something that I was taught when I was 16, 17 years old, to always keep the wheels of the car in front of you visible. These are minor things that will save a life. It helps. There's a reason why we know how to steer out of a skid. There's a reason why we learn braking and other things. And so learning how to respond to a police stop would be a positive thing. And the population's changed. Education's changed. The makeup of Texas changed. So all that would be a positive thing. But to condemn straight out and say that officers don't understand, I think it was a little bit of a misstatement. And I hope he didn't really mean that. And I'll say this, officers do understand. They do understand. They're there in the community. An officer working a certain area really through training, through osmosis, through caring, those officers become a part of that community. They know, they see what it's like. So to condemn the police who have a very risky, violent job out there facing the underbelly of people who are criminals, who intend to hurt others, rapists, armed robbers, murderers, those kinds of folks, to kind of clean them up somehow and to dirty law enforcement, that's not fair. I think the statements also that somehow there should be some sort of mandate on an officer that violates some policy, that officer would have a state law enforced mandate against them, while we're moving away from mandated sentencing for drug dealers and criminals. It's just total hypocrisy, and something we'll need to guard against. So I think law enforcement officers do a good job, and we're not asking them to do too much. They volunteered for this. They want to help. We are asking them to not be paid enough. We're asking them to do without their retirement, and now the police management through the police PERF and other national groups like that are attempting to take away the rights of the officers just to have a fair shake if they're disciplined or there's a complaint against them, and somebody else wants to add more complaints or solicit complaints. So there'll be plenty to work on in the next session, and it's very troubling to see some of these things, but sometimes we need to hear what others have to say. But I absolutely disagree that officers don't understand the minority communities they work in.
Charlie, I know you mentioned some of the talk about, police stop education and driver's ed and public schools. And before, I want to get to that, but before, just real quick, in the hearing, they also mentioned that perhaps what needs to be done is also helping those minority communities, whereas they don't have, the chances or educational chances or job opportunities. Would that be something that could close the tensions or cure the tensions between those communities and law enforcement?
Absolutely, and I think Senator Whitmire would be someone that you could turn to for things like this. He's a long experienced legislator, very able person, and he would agree with things like that. But I do think that sitting up there denigrating officers and blaming them for the relationships they have with lawless criminals, transnational gangs, and people that come into this country for the specific purpose of breaking the law and setting up, drug running criminal gangs, and to color them with the societal relationships that have come since the founding of the country. I think it's particularly short-sighted and unfair. And so I would say that if the only government official you ever come in contact with in your community is a police officer, that's a sad thing. I was a guest teaching a class and asked kids to raise their hand if they knew where the jail was. Every kid knew where the jail was at. Ask them if they knew where where to pay a citation, if their parents had ever paid a ticket. A lot of kids knew that. Everyone knew where the school was. No one knew where to register to vote. Not a single kid in the class knew where to register to vote. And I think when you abdicate your responsibility for creating hope and opportunity in your state, and the legislature passes over giant issues that face us every day, and you go straight to the police and blame them for the relationships in places where the heroes in the streets are drug-running criminals. And then you wonder why generation after generation, come to jail. Perhaps it's not that the law is too strict. Perhaps it's that the legislature failed generation after generation to create education, opportunity, jobs, and the ability for the path to self-determination for its own citizens. And then, so now we're under heat. There's a little populist wave coming through. What are we going to do? Blame the cops. And I'm getting wary of that. And I have to remind myself to keep my good Christian spirit about that, because I'm getting really, really tired of hearing that narrative, because it's false flag and absolutely denigrates the officers, the professional standards they have, the sacrifice they make, the sacrifice their families make, and the great things they do out there. And to focus on this and blame them for something that you did as a legislature that historically has happened in Texas, where it's getting harder to get in a top university, where it's where the opportunities for jobs, manufacturing jobs and other things are happening. It's international trends that are causing some of the issues. But okay, we're going to blame Texas street cops, and they must be racist and they must hate. Well, let me just tell you, the hate, there's enough in the world to go around, and there's a lot of cop hating going on. When these officers put on the blue and brown skin and they come to work, they're getting hated by the criminals. And in this case, I think we're seeing that the wind is blowing toward it being in vogue in some way to disrespect and have open anger and blame law enforcement for doing the job they were trained and hired to do. And isn't it interesting that we sit there and we listen to two managers who speak obviously for other police chiefs across the state, and in that kind of setting, they're sitting there saying, oh, even though we screened this person, recruited this person, hired this person, trained and retrained, and constantly have training and opportunities, and we guide their work, when they make a mistake or something bad happens, even if they don't make a mistake, obviously it's all on them, and they need to go to some sort of psych rehab. Isn't it interesting that they're talking about having psychological evaluations for officers, that the job we've placed on them is somehow turning them in to someone else? Are they shaped by their experiences? You don't pull a little kid out of a car that's on fire and not be shaped by it. You don't hold a lifeless body in your arms and talk to someone in their last seconds before eternity and not be shaped by that. These officers are doing their job. They're going past their training. They're the lifesavers of the community and the protectors of the community. And to say that they need to be more protectors of the community, it's impossible. They're giving their lives the most in America, and their names are on the wall. And I think it was highly, highly disrespectful when people make those kind of connotations toward law enforcement.
Absolutely. And going back to police education, or education on police stops, you already talked a little bit previously about the benefits of that. Would you say it would also be beneficial for law enforcement to go through similar training? And I guess just also, what are some of your final thoughts on the hearing?
Well, I think the hearing overall, go there first. I think the hearing overall is a good thing. It's good for different voices. It's also good for law enforcement not to try to, for the unions to not try to dominate the conversation when the topics are being guided toward of the experience of minority community and the citizens. We need to hear that, and we need those voices to be heard. They need to have their time there and say that. We need to be respectful of that, which I was proud of us. And sometimes it's time to talk, and sometimes it's time to listen. And so we were very respectful in listening to those voices, and they had issues to bring up. To the training of the students that you're mentioning, Of course, it needs to be a mirror. It would be a big mistake for us to come out and educate motorists and citizens and drivers on how to behave at a stop, and not be training officers on what they've been trained to know. I think reminding officers that the motorists are nervous, that they've been pulled over, that a big majority of the community you're going to meet with, they're going to be that you're going to pull over that day, or you're going to encounter the majority are going to be law-abiding citizens that care about you, and I think they want both sides to be safe. I think that is something that needs to be mentioned. On the flip side of that, I think that the students need to be taught that we've lost the most officers in America. That officer is very vulnerable when they get out of their unit and start toward your vehicle. That if they knock on your door, they're fully exposed, and they're standing there, trying to come to save your home, your community. And if they're taking out a criminal, they're still trying to save you and your community. If they're trying to take that person out and put them in the back of their police unit and take them to jail, they're still not only just doing their job, they're trying to save the community from further crime and the exposure to that criminal and that criminal act. So I think those sort of communication during training, I think I mentioned that I think it'd be good if officers taught part of that, and of course I was assured that officers aren't going to teach all of it. Well, we don't need to teach all of it, but officers should teach a portion of that, and both sides need to accept and know and come to understand the vulnerability of officers as they're doing their job, and the anxious feeling in the violent undertow that's out there in Texas, and that officers lose their life and have a fear of losing their life, and they say goodbye to their family and leave for that shift. They never know for sure if they're going to be coming back. Kids need to know that too.
Thank you, Charlie. Thank you, Ariana. That was our first CleatCast. Tune in every Monday. Check us out on Facebook. Thanks.
Thank you.